The auditorium looked beautiful that evening. Bright golden lights shined down from the high ceiling, reflecting softly against the polished wooden stage. The large black grand piano stood at the center, quiet and still, waiting for the next performer. Rows of seats were filled with parents, music teachers, students, and guests dressed in formal clothes. Some held programs in their hands. Others whispered to the person beside them. It was the final round of a respected music competition, and everyone expected to see something impressive. But as the evening went on, the mood inside the hall slowly changed. One performer after another walked onto the stage. Some played well, but many struggled. A few forgot parts of their pieces. One stopped halfway and had to begin again. The judges, seated behind a long table near the stage, tried to stay patient. They were experienced musicians with years of training and performance behind them. At first, they nodded politely and wrote notes on their papers. But as time passed, their faces grew tired. A quiet sigh escaped from one of them after a particularly shaky performance. Another judge leaned back in their chair, rubbing their forehead. The audience could feel it too. The excitement that filled the room at the beginning of the night had slowly faded into something else. Disappointment. Whispers floated through the crowd. This year doesn't seem as strong. Maybe the harder pieces were too much. Are we going to see anything truly special tonight? The judges looked down at the list of remaining contestants. Only one name was left. There was a short pause before the host walked onto the stage again. The host smiled warmly and announced the final performer of the evening. The voice echoed clearly across the hall. An 8-year-old child. A small figure appeared from the side of the stage. The child walked carefully toward the piano, dressed neatly but simply. The shoes looked slightly too new, as if saved for this important night. The child's hands were small, fingers thin and delicate. A soft murmur rose from the audience. So young. Only 8. Some people smiled kindly. Others looked unsure. A few glanced at the judges, wondering what they were thinking. One of the judges quietly flipped through the program booklet to check the chosen piece. The judge's eyebrows lifted slightly. The composition listed was not simple. It was known for its speed, sharp changes, and emotional depth. It was the kind of piece older students often avoided because of how demanding it was. The judge leaned toward another and whispered something. The other judge gave a small shrug. It had been a long night. Perhaps this would be a sweet, short performance to close the event. The child reached the piano bench and adjusted it slightly. The bench looked large compared to the small body sitting on it. The feet barely reached the pedals. For a brief moment, the child looked out at the audience. Hundreds of faces stared back. Some curious, some tired, some already doubtful. From the front row, a pair of proud but nervous eyes watched closely. Hands were clasped tightly together. A silent prayer seemed to pass through trembling lips. The child turned back to the piano. Inside that small body, the heart was beating fast. The lights felt warm on the skin. The room felt bigger than ever before. The sound of quiet coughing and shifting chairs seemed louder than usual. But there was also something else inside, something steady. The child had seen this piano before during rehearsals, had touched these keys, had practiced for hours every single day for months. Early mornings before school, late evenings when other children were playing outside. There had been mistakes. There had been tears. There had been moments of wanting to give up. But there had also been love for the music. The judges straightened slightly in their chairs. One of them held a pen ready to write. Another looked at the clock on the wall. The child placed both hands gently on the keys. For 1 second, nothing happened. The hall became completely silent. Even the whispers stopped. The child closed their eyes. The first note rang out. Clear, soft, perfectly placed. A few people in the audience shifted in their seats, surprised by the confidence of that single note. It was not hesitant. It was not shaky. It carried strength. Then came the next notes. And the next. Within seconds, the melody began to flow like water. The small fingers moved with surprising control. There was no rushing, no visible panic. The rhythm felt steady and sure. One judge slowly lowered their pen. Another judge leaned forward slightly. The piece grew more complex. The left hand began moving quickly across lower keys, while the right hand danced over higher notes. The speed increased, but the control remained. Each note sounded clean. Each phrase connected smoothly to the next. The audience stopped whispering completely now. The earlier disappointment that hung in the air started to disappear. In its place, something else began to grow: curiosity. How could someone so young understand the music like this? The child's face remained calm, but inside there was deep focus. Every movement had been practiced again and again at home. The small living room where the old upright piano stood had heard this piece hundreds of times. Neighbors had probably memorized it by accident. But here, on this grand stage, the music sounded even bigger. The middle section of the piece approached the part many musicians feared. It required fast crossing of hands and quick jumps between keys. Even experienced players sometimes stumbled here. One of the judges glanced down at the score, then back at the child's hands. The fingers moved swiftly. One hand crossed over the other without hesitation. The tempo remained steady. Not a single note was missed. The judge's eyes widened slightly. In the audience, someone gasped quietly. The child did not look at the crowd. The eyes stayed focused on the keys. The small shoulders remained relaxed. It did not look forced. It did not look like a child trying to prove something. It looked natural, as if the music belonged there. A memory flashed through the child's mind. Sitting at home, struggling with this exact part weeks earlier. Frustration had filled the room. There had been moments when the hands simply would not cooperate. The piece felt too big, too difficult. But instead of quitting, the child had slowed it down. Practiced it piece by piece, note by note. Now those hours were paying off. The judges exchanged a quick glance. This was no ordinary closing performance. The audience leaned forward, completely awake now. Phones that had been resting in laps were slowly lifted to record. People who had looked bored earlier were now wide-eyed. The music continued to build, growing louder and more powerful. For a moment, it was hard to believe that such strong sound was coming from such small hands. And yet, there it was. The child pressed the pedals carefully, adding depth to the sound. The hall filled with rich harmonies. The earlier tired feeling in the room was gone completely. Even the judges, who had seemed ready to end the evening, now looked fully alert. The child moved into the next section seamlessly. No pause, no fear. Outside the stage lights, the world did not exist. There was only the piano, only the music, only the next note waiting to be played. And for the first time that night, everyone in the auditorium felt something shift. They were not just watching a child perform. They were witnessing something rare, something unexpected, something that made them sit up and pay attention. The final section of the piece was approaching, and the energy in the room was completely different from before. No one was tired anymore. No one was whispering. Every eye was fixed on that small figure at the piano, fingers moving with confidence beyond their years. The judges had come close to giving up hope earlier that evening. After so many average performances, they had almost surrendered to disappointment. But now, as the music filled the hall with life, it was clear that this final contestant had brought something no one had seen coming. And the performance was only just beginning. The music did not slow down after the opening section. Instead, it grew stronger. The small hands moved across the keys with a confidence that did not match the child's age. The fingers were quick, but not wild. Every movement had purpose. Every note had weight. The sound that filled the hall was rich and alive. One of the judges, who had earlier leaned back in quiet disappointment, now sat forward with both elbows on the table. The pen that had been ready to write criticism rested untouched. The judge was no longer searching for mistakes. The judge was listening. The piece entered a faster passage. The notes began to run like a stream after heavy rain. It was the kind of section that often caused panic. Many performers rushed here. Some lost control. Some stumbled. But not this child. The tempo remained steady. The shoulders stayed relaxed. The head tilted slightly toward the piano, as if listening to a secret conversation inside the instrument. In the audience, the change was clear. The earlier whispers were gone. People who had crossed their arms now sat upright. Someone in the middle row slowly lowered the program booklet, completely forgetting to turn the page. A quiet sense of disbelief began to spread. From the front row, a pair of eyes filled with emotion. Months of early practice, repeated corrections, and long evenings had led to this moment. There had been days when the child's hands were too tired. Days when homework felt heavy and music practice felt even heavier. But there had never been a day when the child refused to try again. That determination was visible now. The music softened suddenly, moving into a delicate section. The shift was smooth, almost effortless. The child adjusted the touch, playing lighter, as if the keys were fragile glass. The hall grew so quiet that even the faint sound of the pedals could be heard. One judge glanced at another, and for the first time that evening, there was a hint of a smile. This was not memorized movement without feeling. This was understanding. The child was not simply pressing keys in the correct order. The child was shaping the music, giving it breath, giving it emotion. There were small pauses in the right places. Gentle rises and falls in volume. Felt natural. A man in the back row, who had been checking his phone earlier, slowly slid it into his pocket. He did not want to miss a single note now. The difficult middle section approached again, this time even faster than before. The left hand had to jump quickly between low and middle keys. The right hand carried a bright, fast melody above it. The child's fingers lifted and landed with precision. No hesitation. No visible fear. The judges were no longer hiding their reactions. One of them raised their eyebrows in surprise. Another quietly shook their head, almost in disbelief. How could an 8-year-old control the timing like this? The music swelled, growing louder and more powerful. It filled every corner of the auditorium. The grand piano, which had seemed silent and ordinary earlier, now felt alive under those small hands. For a moment, the audience forgot the age of the performer. They forgot the long evening. They forgot the earlier disappointment. All they could focus on was the sound. The child leaned slightly forward as the piece reached one of its most demanding parts. The hands crossed over each other quickly, one passing above the other in a blur of movement. It happened so smoothly that it looked almost simple. But those who understood music knew better. This was not simple. This required discipline, patience, countless hours of practice. A woman in the second row placed her hand over her mouth, surprised by how flawless it sounded. The judges no longer looked tired. Their expressions had completely changed. The earlier doubt had faded, replaced by focus and quiet respect. The child's face remained calm, but inside, there was intense concentration. Each measure of the piece had been broken down at home, practiced slowly before being played at full speed. There had been times when tears fell onto the piano keys. Times when frustration made the child want to walk away. But someone had always been there to say, "Try once more." And the child always did. The music entered a dramatic section. The notes became bold and strong. The small body did not move much, but the sound carried power. The audience could feel the emotion rising in the melody. It was no longer about proving anything. It was about telling a story through sound. One of the judges gently placed both hands flat on the table, no longer pretending to search for technical flaws. The search was over. The child had already passed that test. Now, the judges were simply witnesses. The fast run toward the climax of the piece began. The fingers moved like lightning, gliding up the keyboard with speed that seemed impossible for such small hands. The timing was exact. The rhythm steady. There was no rushing to finish. The child was in control. The audience felt their hearts beat faster with the rising tempo. The sound grew brighter, fuller. The moment felt bigger than the competition itself. For a brief second, one key might have been touched slightly harder than planned, but it blended naturally into the music. No one noticed. It did not break the flow. It did not create doubt. The piece moved forward confidently. The judges looked at one another again, but this time there was no confusion. There was silent agreement. This was extraordinary. As the music reached the final demanding stretch before the ending, the child's hands did not shake. The pedals were used carefully, adding depth without blurring the sound. The audience could sense the ending approaching, but no one wanted it to end. A powerful chord rang out, strong and clear. Then another. The final fast sequence began, the one that often decided whether a performance was remembered or forgotten. The child did not slow down. The fingers flew across the keys, landing exactly where they should. The final notes built like a wave rising higher and higher. Then came the last chord. It echoed through the hall. And then silence. Not the uncomfortable silence from earlier in the evening. This silence was different. It was heavy with surprise. The child's hands remained on the keys for a brief moment, letting the final sound fade naturally. Slowly, the hands lifted. The small body sat still. The audience remained frozen. The judges did not move. For a few long seconds, it felt as if time itself had stopped. No one had expected this. No one had predicted that the final contestant, the smallest one, would completely change the mood of the night. The child turned slightly on the bench and stood up carefully. There was no dramatic gesture, no proud expression, just a simple, quiet posture. The judges were still seated, but their faces said everything. Earlier that evening, they had nearly surrendered to disappointment. They had prepared themselves to close the event without witnessing anything truly remarkable. But now they were speechless. The applause had not yet begun. It was as if the audience needed a moment to fully understand what they had just seen. The child gave a small bow, simple and polite. And that was the moment the silence finally broke. The applause did not begin loudly. It started with a few claps from the middle row, almost unsure, almost hesitant. Then someone in the front row stood up. The sound grew stronger. More hands came together. Within seconds, the entire hall was filled with applause that echoed against the high ceiling. It was not polite clapping. It was not forced. It was the kind of applause that rises from shock and admiration at the same time. The child stood still near the piano bench, looking slightly overwhelmed. The bright lights made it hard to see the faces clearly, but the sound of hundreds of people clapping was impossible to ignore. The small chest rose and fell quickly. The performance had ended, but the heart was still racing. One of the judges slowly stood up. The audience noticed immediately. It was rare for a judge to stand before giving official results. The other judges looked at each other for a brief second. Then one by one, they also rose from their seats. The applause grew even louder. The child blinked, unsure how to react. The hands stayed close to the sides, fingers slightly curled, as if they still remembered the shape of the keys. The standing ovation continued longer than anyone expected. In the front row, tears rolled quietly down a proud face. Not loud crying, just silent tears that had been held back for months. The kind that come after long struggles finally meet their reward. The host stepped onto the stage again, waiting for the applause to calm down. Took time. People were still clapping, still shaking their heads in disbelief. When the sound slowly softened, the judges took their seats again. But their expressions had completely changed from earlier in the night. The first judge picked up the microphone. There was a small pause before speaking. "I don't usually do this," the judge said softly, voice steady but emotional. "But tonight, I need to speak honestly." The hall was silent again. Earlier this evening, I believed we had already seen the best this competition could offer. I was wrong. A quiet ripple moved through the audience. The judge turned slightly toward the child. What we just witnessed was not only technical skill. It was understanding. It was discipline. It was heart. The child listened quietly, eyes wide. Another judge leaned toward the microphone. "That piece is difficult for grown musicians. Many avoid performing it in public. To play it with such control at 8 years old is rare." The word rare hung in the air. The third judge, who had been the most critical earlier, adjusted their glasses before speaking. "There were moments tonight when I nearly gave up hope for this competition. I thought perhaps we would close without anything memorable. But you reminded us why we sit at this table. The audience responded with soft applause again. The child shifted weight slightly from one foot to the other, not fully understanding the depth of the words, but sensing their importance. The host smiled warmly and stepped closer. "Would you like to say something?" the host asked gently. The microphone was lowered toward the child. For a moment there was hesitation. Public speaking was far more frightening than playing the piano. The child swallowed and looked toward the front row for reassurance. A small nod came in return. "I just practiced a lot," the child said quietly. "I really love the music." Simple words, but they carried truth. The audience smiled. Some laughed softly in a warm way. The innocence of the answer made the moment even more powerful. The judges exchanged another glance. They could see it clearly now. This was not a performance built on pressure or forced ambition. It was built on love for the instrument. The host guided the child gently to the side of the stage while the judges prepared for final scoring. The audience buzzed with quiet conversation. "Did you see the hand crossing? That tempo was perfect. I thought there would be at least one mistake. 8 years old. Unbelievable." Backstage, the child finally allowed the shoulders to relax. The bright lights were gone. The sound of the audience was softer now. A familiar figure rushed forward with open arms. The hug was tight and full of relief. "You did it," came a whisper filled with emotion. The child smiled, still slightly confused by the scale of what had happened. "Was it okay?" the child asked. It was more than okay. There had been nights when doubt felt stronger than hope. When balancing school and practice felt too heavy. When small hands ached from repeating the same passage again and again. There had been moments when others questioned the choice of such a difficult piece. Maybe choose something easier. Don't risk it. It's too advanced. But something inside the child had refused to step back. The challenge had not felt scary. It had felt exciting. Back on stage, the judges finished their quiet discussion. The score sheets were compared carefully. It did not take long. The host returned to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. The judges have reached their final decision." The hall grew silent once more. The child was guided back onto the stage. Standing under the lights again felt different now. The nervous fear from earlier was gone. In its place was calm curiosity. The host opened the envelope slowly. In third place, applause followed the announcement of another contestant's name. In second place, more applause. Then came the final pause. And in first place, the child held a breath without realizing it. "Our youngest performer of the night." The hall erupted again. The child blinked in surprise. It was real. The trophy was placed carefully into small hands. It felt heavier than expected. Flashing cameras captured the moment. The judges stepped forward to shake hands. One judge leaned down slightly and said quietly, "Never stop playing." Those words mattered more than the trophy. As the applause continued, something deeper settled into the room. This competition had started with doubt, with tired expressions and low expectations. It ended with inspiration. The audience did not just witness talent. They witnessed perseverance. They witnessed what dedication can create when paired with passion. When the event finally came to a close and people began leaving their seats, conversations filled the hall again. But this time the tone was different. It was hopeful. Outside the building, under the cool night sky, the child held the trophy carefully while walking toward the car. The city lights flickered softly in the distance. "Are you happy?" came a gentle question. The child thought for a moment. "I'm happy I played it right," came the simple answer. No talk of fame. No talk of winning. Just satisfaction in doing the best possible. As the car door closed and the building lights slowly dimmed behind them, the night felt peaceful. Inside that small heart, there was not pride, not arrogance, but gratitude. The judges had nearly surrendered earlier that evening. But a small pair of hands at a grand piano had changed everything. And though the competition was over, something much bigger had just begun. The night of the competition should have ended like any other event. People should have gone home, talked about it for a day or two, and then moved on. But that did not happen. By the next morning, short video clips from the performance had already started spreading online. Someone from the audience had recorded the most difficult section, the fast hand crossing, the flawless run, the final powerful chord. The video was not perfectly steady. You could hear someone gasp in the background, but that made it feel real. Within hours, thousands of people had watched it. Comments began to appear under the video. 8 years old? No way. This is pure talent. I got chills. Those judges didn't expect that. The child had no idea any of this was happening. The morning after the competition felt normal. There was school. There was homework. There was the same small kitchen table where breakfast was served every day. The trophy sat carefully on a shelf in the living room. It looked shiny and important, but life around it continued as usual. At school, a few classmates had already seen the video. When the child walked into the classroom, something felt different. Usually, mornings were loud and messy, full of running and laughing. But this time, a few students turned and stared. Is it true you won first place? Did you really play that fast? Are you famous now? The child felt shy and gave a small shrug. I just played, came the simple answer. But the teachers had seen the video too. One of them gently placed a hand on the child's shoulder and said, "We are very proud of you." Those words meant more than the online comments. Meanwhile, the judges were also feeling the impact of that night. One of them received several messages from fellow musicians asking about the young performer. Another judge was invited to speak about the competition on a local radio show. During the interview, the host asked, "Did you expect that kind of performance from someone so young?" The judge laughed softly. "Honestly? No, we didn't. And that is exactly why it was so powerful." The story of the child who surprised everyone began to travel beyond the auditorium. A local newspaper requested an interview. A small camera crew asked if they could visit the home where all the practice had happened. At first, the family hesitated. Life had always been simple and private. The attention felt sudden and overwhelming. But they agreed as long as everything remained respectful. When the camera crew arrived, they were surprised by what they saw. There was no large music studio, no expensive decorations, just a small living room with an upright piano placed near the window. The paint on the walls was slightly faded. The piano keys showed signs of long use. "This is where you practice?" one of the reporters asked gently. The child nodded. "How many hours a day?" The answer was honest. "Sometimes 2, sometimes 3. If I make mistakes, I practice more." The reporter smiled. "Do you ever get tired?" A small pause. "Yes, but I don't want to stop." That sentence later became the headline of the article. "I don't want to stop." The article shared more than just the performance. It shared the quiet mornings before school when practice began. It shared the evenings when frustration led to tears. It shared the encouragement that never disappeared. Readers connected with that part of the story. It wasn't just about talent. It was about effort. Invitations started coming in. Another music competition in a nearby city asked if the child would perform as a special guest. A local music teacher offered advanced lessons at no cost. A small concert hall reached out to organize a short recital. Everything felt like it was moving very fast. But inside the home, one rule remained clear. School came first. Practice continued as usual. No special treatment. No skipping homework. No late-night events on school days. The child still woke up early. Still sat at the same piano bench. Still repeated difficult passages slowly before speeding them up. One evening, after finishing practice, the child looked at the trophy again. "Do you think I can play something even harder next time?" came the quiet question. The answer was careful and calm. "Only if you truly love it. Not to impress anyone." That was important, because attention can change people. At the next small recital, the hall was full. Some people came because they had seen the video. Others came out of curiosity. The judges from the competition were not there this time. There were no score sheets, no ranking, just a piano and an audience. Before going on stage, the child felt the old nervous feeling return. Fame online did not make the fear disappear, If anything, it made it stronger. What if I make a mistake this time? A reassuring voice replied, mistakes are allowed. Music is not about being perfect. It's about being honest. The performance that night was beautiful but not flawless. There was one small slip in the middle section. The fingers landed slightly off for a fraction of a second. But the child did not freeze. The hands continued. The rhythm recovered. The piece reached its ending smoothly, and the audience applauded just as warmly. Afterward, someone in the crowd said, I liked it even more tonight. It felt real. That comment mattered deeply, because it reminded everyone that being human is part of art. As weeks passed, the online attention slowly settled. The video was still shared occasionally, but the excitement was no longer new. Life returned to a steady rhythm. The judges moved on to other competitions. The audience members returned to their daily routines. The spotlight softened, but something had permanently changed. The child no longer practiced just in a small living room. Now there was belief not only from others but from within. The moment when the judges had nearly surrendered became a quiet lesson. Never assume. Never judge too quickly. Never underestimate someone because of age. One afternoon, the child received a handwritten letter from one of the judges. It was simple and thoughtful. It said, that night reminded me why I became a musician. Thank you. The child read the letter twice and placed it carefully next to the trophy. Not as a sign of victory, but as a reminder. Months later, during another school assembly, the principal asked the child to speak about the experience. Standing in front of classmates felt more frightening than any stage with a piano. The child held the microphone tightly. I was scared, came the honest confession. I thought I might mess up, but I practiced a lot, and I tried my best. A student raised a hand. How do you become that good? The answer was simple again. You keep going when you feel like stopping. The room grew quiet, because everyone understood that feeling. The story that began with judges nearly giving up did not end with a trophy. It continued in small daily choices. Choosing to practice. Choosing not to quit. Choosing to stay humble. One evening, long after the excitement had faded, the child sat alone at the piano. No audience. No cameras. No judges. Just soft light from a lamp and quiet outside. The fingers began to play. Not the competition piece this time, but a simple melody. Slow, gentle, free. There was no pressure, only love for the sound. And in that quiet moment, it became clear that the most important part of the story was not the applause. It was the journey that continued long after it ended. The judges had surrendered once, but the child never did. And that made all the difference. Months passed, and life slowly found a steady rhythm again. The excitement from the competition had cooled, but the impact of that night still lived quietly in many hearts. The video of the performance no longer trended every day, yet people still shared it from time to time, usually with the same sentence, never underestimate anyone. For the child, things felt both different and the same. School mornings still came early. Homework still needed to be finished. Practice still happened every evening. The piano by the window had not changed, but something inside had grown stronger. Confidence. Not loud confidence. Not pride. Just quiet belief. One afternoon, a letter arrived with an official stamp on the envelope. It was an invitation to perform at a regional youth music festival. Unlike the previous competition, this event would bring together some of the best young musicians from different cities. Many of them were older. Some had already been performing for years. The child held the letter carefully, reading it twice. Do you want to do it? Came the gentle question. There was a pause. The memory of the last big stage returned. The bright lights, the silent hall, the powerful applause. Yes, the child said softly. But I want to choose my own piece this time. That answer brought a smile. Preparation began again, but this time it felt different. There was no need to prove anything. No need to shock judges or surprise an audience. The goal was simple. Play something meaningful. Instead of picking the fastest or most difficult piece, the child chose one that told a story. It began softly, almost like a whisper, and slowly built into something warm and hopeful. It required control and emotion more than speed. Practice sessions became thoughtful and focused. Some evenings were smooth, others were frustrating. There were moments when a certain passage refused to sound right. Fingers slipped. Timing felt off. During one of those evenings, the child pushed away from the piano bench and crossed both arms. "I can't get this part right," came the quiet frustration. "You can," came the calm reply. "Just slower. Break it into pieces." So that's what happened. One small section at a time. No rushing. No pressure. Days turned into weeks. The festival arrived. The venue was larger than the first competition. The backstage area buzzed with energy. Young musicians tuned violins. Someone practiced scales on a flute. Another contestant rehearsed quietly on a keyboard in the corner. The child watched them with wide eyes. "They all look so confident," came the whisper. "Confidence is not always what it looks like," came the soft answer. "Many of them are nervous too." When the child's name was called, the heart began to beat faster again. Walking onto the stage felt familiar now, but still serious. The audience was full, though not as tense as competition night. This was a celebration of music, not a battle. The piano waited under the lights. Sitting down, adjusting the bench, placing hands on the keys, these small actions felt steady now. The first note sounded gentle, clear. The piece began quietly, almost as if inviting the audience to lean in closer. The child focused on breathing, on feeling the rhythm rather than counting it strictly. The middle section grew warmer, fuller. The sound filled the hall in a different way than the competition piece had. This was not about speed or technical shock. It was about connection. A few people in the audience closed their eyes while listening. The child moved into the final section, the part that had caused frustration during practice. This time, the fingers stayed calm. The timing flowed naturally. The ending was soft and peaceful. When the last note faded, there was no stunned silence like before. Instead, there was immediate, heartfelt applause. Not explosive, not shocked, but deeply appreciative. Backstage, another young performer approached and smiled. "That was beautiful," they said. "It felt like a story." The child smiled shyly. "Thank you." Later that evening, results were announced. The child did not win first place this time. Another performer, older and very skilled, received that honor. For a brief moment, a small feeling of disappointment appeared, but it did not last long, because something else was stronger. Satisfaction. "I played it how I wanted to," the child said quietly on the way home. "That's what matters most," came the reply. That night, there were no tears, no sadness, just reflection. Winning had once felt like everything. Now it felt like only one part of a much bigger journey. Weeks later, something unexpected happened. One of the judges from the original competition invited the child to visit a music academy in the city. Not for fame, not for publicity, but for learning. The academy building was large and filled with sound. Pianos echoed from different rooms. Students of all ages moved through hallways carrying sheet music. The judge met them at the entrance with a warm smile. "I wanted you to see what is possible," the judge said gently. Inside one practice room, an older student was working through a complex piece, repeating the same section again and again. Sweat formed on the student's forehead. "Even the best practice like this," the judge said quietly. "Talent opens a door. Hard work keeps it open." Those words stayed in the child's mind. During the visit, the child was allowed to sit at one of the academy's grand pianos. The keys felt smooth and responsive. The sound was rich and deep. "What do you want to become?" the judge asked kindly. The child thought for a long moment. "I just want to keep playing," came the honest answer. The judge smiled. "Then keep playing. Don't let pressure change that." As years slowly moved forward, the memory of the night when the judges nearly surrendered remained important, but not because of the applause. It was important because it showed that doubt can be wrong. Sometimes even experienced adults cannot see what is coming. Sometimes belief must come from within. One evening at home, The child opened a small notebook and began writing new melodies. Simple at first, then more complex. The fingers tested them on the piano, adjusted notes, changed rhythms. It was the beginning of something new, not just playing music written by others, but creating music from the heart. Outside, the world continued its busy rhythm. People chased success. Competitions came and went. New young talents appeared online every week. But inside that small living room, the reason for playing remained the same. Not fame, not trophies, not headlines, just love for the sound. The judges had once surrendered before the performance even began. But the child never surrendered to doubt. And now, standing at the edge of something bigger than a single competition, it was clear that the story was not about one flawless performance in seconds. It was about growth, about staying humble after applause, about standing back up after not winning, about choosing music again and again. And the journey was still only beginning. Years later, people still remembered that night. Not everyone, of course. The world moves fast. New videos appear every day. New young talents go viral. New stories take over attention. But for those who were in that auditorium, and for those who watched that original clip online, the image remained clear. A small child sitting at a grand piano while the judges slowly realized they had been wrong. Time passed quietly after the festival. The child grew taller. The small hands that once barely reached the keys became stronger and more confident. School became more demanding. Homework increased. Friendships changed. Life became busier. But the piano stayed in the same place near the window. Every evening, the routine continued. Homework first. Dinner. Then practice. Some days were filled with excitement. Other days felt heavy. There were moments of doubt that returned, especially during teenage years when everything feels uncertain. One evening, after a long day at school, the child, no longer so small, sat at the piano but did not start playing right away. What if that was my best moment? Came the quiet thought. What if I already peaked at 8? It was a strange fear, but a real one. The memory of applause can sometimes feel like pressure. People expect more. They expect bigger performances, faster pieces, greater achievements. The room was quiet. The late afternoon sun came through the window, touching the piano keys with soft light. You don't have to be better than that night, came a calm voice from behind. You only have to be better than yesterday. Those words settled something inside. The fingers finally touched the keys. The sound that came out was different from years before. Deeper, more thoughtful. There was maturity now, not just in technique, but in emotion. The child who once shocked judges had become a young musician who understood something bigger. Music was not about proving people wrong. It was about expressing something true. In high school, there were opportunities to join different activities, sports teams, clubs, social events. Sometimes it was difficult to balance everything. There were evenings when practice felt like a burden instead of joy. During one of those weeks, the piano lid stayed closed for 3 days. On the 4th day, something felt missing. Without even thinking too much, the lid was lifted. The bench was pulled closer. The hands rested on the keys again. The first few notes felt stiff. But then something opened. Music had always been the place where feelings could breathe. Stress from exams. Confusion about the future. Even small arguments with friends, everything softened through sound. One afternoon, while preparing for a local recital, a message arrived from one of the original judges. I am organizing a special anniversary concert for past winners. The message read, I would be honored if you would perform. Reading that message brought back the entire journey. The bright lights, the stunned silence, the standing ovation. But this time, the feeling was not about pressure. It was about gratitude. The anniversary concert was held in the same auditorium as the original competition. Walking into the building again felt surreal. The hallway looked smaller now. The stage seemed less frightening. Backstage, former contestants greeted each other. Some had chosen careers in music. Others had taken different paths but still played for love. When it was time to perform, the young musician walked onto the stage calmly. The audience included some familiar faces, including the judges who once nearly surrendered. There was no need to shock anyone this time. The piece chosen for this performance was one that told the story of growth, beginning with simple, gentle notes, then building into something rich and full. As the music filled the hall, it felt like a conversation with the past. The small child from years ago still existed somewhere inside. But now there was more understanding, more patience, more depth. The performance was not flawless. There was one tiny slip near the end. But it did not matter, because the emotion carried through. When the final note faded, the applause was warm and steady, not explosive like before, but filled with respect. After the concert, one of the judges approached. "I remember thinking we had seen everything that night," the judge said softly. "And then you proved us wrong in seconds." A gentle smile followed. "But what impresses me even more," the judge continued, "is that you never stopped growing." Those words meant more than any trophy. Later that evening, sitting alone at the piano at home, the young musician thought about the journey. It had never been only about talent. There had been early mornings when sleep felt more tempting than practice. There had been competitions that were not won. There had been pieces that took months to master. There had been moments of fear, frustration, and doubt. But through all of it, one thing remained constant: the decision not to quit. The original title of that unforgettable night could have been about judges surrendering. But the deeper truth was different. It was about refusing to surrender to self-doubt. Years later, younger students sometimes asked for advice. How do I become that good? The answer never changed. You practice, you listen, you stay patient, and you keep going when it feels hard. Some students expected a secret formula, a shortcut, a hidden trick. There wasn't one. The real secret was simple and not glamorous. Consistency, love for the craft, humility after success, strength after failure. One evening, while cleaning the shelf, the old trophy from the first competition was picked up again. It was slightly dusty now. Not forgotten, just no longer the center of attention. The young musician smiled at it. That night changed everything, came the quiet thought. But not because of the applause. It changed everything because it proved that age does not define ability. That quiet dedication can surprise even experts. That belief can be stronger than doubt. The judges had surrendered too soon, but the child had not, and that made all the difference. As the sun set outside the window, the piano keys reflected soft orange light. The fingers began to play once more. Not for an audience, not for cameras, not for awards, just for the love of sound. The journey that began with one fearless performance in seconds had grown into something far deeper. A lifelong relationship with music. And somewhere out there, in another auditorium, perhaps another small child was sitting nervously at a piano while adults whispered doubts. Maybe those adults would learn the same lesson. Never underestimate quiet determination, because sometimes the smallest hands carry the greatest strength. And sometimes the moment others surrender is exactly when your story truly begins.